1, 2, 3, 4.
In this podcast, you will be here. Knights of Vader, Knights of Vader includes, but is not limited to, talk of Star Wars, not ray guns. We can't truly prepare you for the junk that follows this song, but hey, we gave it a try. So here's the Knights of Vader. Crystal Fox report, they are divided. Prequel, sequel, cadence, love they ride. I know that we are just musicians hired, and their time is up, so here's the Knights of Vader.
Impressive. Most impressive.
Thank you to An Insperiority Complex for providing our theme song. This is Chris Porteous here for the Knights of Vader podcast, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, somebody who has really informed my Star Wars knowledge ever since I was following the early issues of Star Wars Insider as a little kid, and that's Dan Madsen, and he was the president of the official Star Wars fan club for about 15 years, and he really made an impact on a lot of us who were waiting for that early information about the prequel trilogy and sort of following along as those movies came out. And he was a real critical element for us fans in that period just before Episode 1, which personally I view as the most exciting time ever to be a Star Wars fan, the couple years leading up to Episode 1. So it's a real pleasure to have you here, Dan. How are you doing today?
Nice to be here, Chris. Thank you. It's I look forward to chatting Star Wars. I'm always up for a good Star Wars chat.
Wonderful. So for those of you who might not know, Star Wars Insider magazine started out as the Lucasfilm fan club magazine. And
right.
Especially early on, you were doing a whole lot of the copywriting and interviews for that. I recently pulled out my issue of the first issue of Insider where the name changed over. And, you know, a lot of the written content in that is you directly as the president. There's some great interviews with Kenny Baker and a wonderful opening letter about the change of the name, sort of reflecting the fact that the Star Wars engine was starting up again, and that was in 94. What can you tell me about that period? You know, I'm sure there must have been a lot going on internally where you were privy to some stuff that you couldn't roll out quite as fast as you were getting it.
That was probably one of the most exciting times for me being involved with Star Wars, because I started the club, relaunched the club, I should say, in 87. And for so long, we had been hearing rumors of, well, George might get back to Star Wars. Oh, maybe, in a few years, maybe in another few years. And it just kind of kept going and going like that. So it got to a point where some of the people, I think, were even thinking, well, he's never going to do Star Wars again. It's just, it's just a hopeful wish that maybe he might do it. So when the time came that I got word that the actual prequels were going to be begun, and that meant into the script writing, story breakdown, all of that, and it was before it officially got announced. So I was so excited to know that these were in the works, but I couldn't say anything, and I couldn't print anything in the magazine because they wanted it to come out, appropriately when they officially announced it. So it was anticlimactic when the time came when Lucasfilm actually announced it, because I knew all along. But the great thing about that is that after that announcement, we could start talking about it in the magazine. We could start maybe picking out a few people that we could interview to give updates on and such. It was an exciting time to be a Star Wars fan during that period where they announced the prequels were actually going to be happening. And like you, Chris, I really think that time period, those late 90s, moving up to 1999 and Episode 1's and opening, I really think that was the best time ever to be a Star Wars fan, because the excitement of having this comeback, everybody had been waiting so long. We knew a new movie was going into production soon. And, you could just feel the excitement and the buzz about Star Wars at that point. You could feel the engine starting to start back up again, and we were really kind of at ground zero, because we were the ones that Lucasfilm was sending the fans to, We were the ones that was going to be putting out the information about what was starting to come forward with the prequels. And, I still look at even the time period up to Force Awakens. That was exciting, but it wasn't anywhere near as exciting as the few years up to 1999 and the first prequel. The buzz, the excitement, the anticipation. I never seen anything like it. And I don't think we'll see anything like it again in the Star Wars universe. I think that was unique. That was a time and a place that happened, and that won't ever come again. There will always be excitement when something new is coming down the pike for Star Wars. But for that time period, that had to be the peak of it. And I think, I feel privileged that not only was I alive during that time, but we were, at Star Wars Ground Zero, getting to work with it and promote it and talk with the fans. And it was an exciting time.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. And I think what we really need to impress upon our listeners here is, if for those of you who are not super familiar with Dan, when he says he was at Ground Zero, he quite literally means that he probably sat down with George Lucas in his office and had an interview session wherein Lucas gave him some new details about the fact that he had started working on episode 1. Like, that's quite literally what we're talking about, right, Dan?
That is correct. And Rick McCallum as well, who was his right-hand man on the producing on the film. So yes, the two of them, and getting to go out to Skywalker Ranch and view some of the original storyboards and art that they were working on, and seeing the first trailer before it ever came out in the theaters. It just is, it was hard to keep my mouth shut, but I had to do it. It was part of the Star Wars team, so it was an exciting time.
Absolutely. That first episode 1 trailer is just like a historic moment in terms of just trailer history. I was probably 8 at the time, but I remember being at camp or something, and my parents actually taped that trailer premiere off the news for me on VHS for me to watch when I got home. And and you see those the Cadus coming through the mist of the Gungan army, and you were just you had no idea what was in store for you. And I don't personally, I'm a big fan of the prequels, but I don't think anything could have lived up to that trailer at the time. Yeah. But it was just you were so full of anticipation seeing that thing that it was just electric.
I know of no other film or any other project that had people standing in line to go see a different movie just so they could see the trailer, and then they would be done with that and they'd leave because they didn't want that. All they wanted was to see the Star Wars trailer and then get back in line for the next showing of whatever movie it was so they could see the trailer again.
I'm pretty sure the big one was Meet Joe Black, which is like, if I'm not mistaken, it's a weird Brad Pitt movie or something, which I think we've talked about on this show before. That's quite a phenomenon that you won't ever recapture again, just because the media landscape has changed so much that trailer's on YouTube the moment it comes out, and you're not having to download it with DSL like 1 frame at a time or anything like that. So
yeah, it was a whole different time and place. It really was. And
really not that long ago. It just shows you how insane the evolution of media has been over the last 25 years.
Man, no kidding.
Yeah. So something that would really interest our listeners is that, you did a ton of interviews for Insider. If you had to guess, how many times did you actually sit down with Lucas himself and do an interview for the magazine or the fan club?
Oh my gosh. I probably maybe 6 times that I sat down with George, and I'd always fly out to Skywalker Ranch and go up to his office there in the main house and sit down and chat with him. And I would say about 6 times I interviewed George, and it was always such a fun, nerve-wracking opportunity to go meet with George because I was a professional editor, publisher, writer, but at the same time I was a huge Star Wars fan. So it's hard not to geek out when you're sitting there at Skywalker Ranch in his office, talking to the man who created Star Wars. So yeah, and he always treated me with great respect. And sometimes when I was at the ranch, I'd be walking down a hallway, and all of a sudden, who comes around the corner but George? And I'd always say, "Hi, George," and he'd say, "Hi, how are you? What are you doing here?" And I'd be like, "Well, I'm working on doing a licensing deal on this or that or something." And but yeah, he was always such a wonderful person to talk with, and he always gave me all the time I wanted. He never cut me short on anything.
It's so hard to imagine what that must have been like. I want to just hone in on, and I'm sure you remember stuff like this, but the first time you met George Lucas, paint a picture for us. What's the situation? What's going on?
Well, the first time I met George was for the first interview for the Fan Club magazine. It was back during the time that Willow was coming out. And so majority of the interview with him was talking about Willow, but then also about Star Wars past, but Star Wars present. And then Lynn Hale, absolutely amazing head of PR for Lucasfilm, who's been there, I think, 35 years and is now retiring this year. She met me at the ranch, and then it was she and I that would go up to George's office. And I remember as I walked into his office, it was rather large. And over in the corner, he was kind of over in the corner at a desk with a little kind of a little Victorian green lamp lit there, and he was working on something. And he had asked Lynn to come over and talk about something. So Lynn said, just go out and I could go outside and stand on the deck there on the little patio out in the front of the house. And then she'd let me know when he was available, ready. And it took maybe 5 minutes, and she called me in, and, I went in, and we had a great introduction. He said he really liked what I was doing with the fan club, and we shook hands, and he sat down in a big cushy couch, and I sat down in a big cushy chair, and with a window right behind me. And I got my recorder out, and I popped it on and said, "Are you ready, George?" And he said, "I'm ready." And then we did the interview, and Lynn sat there on the couch with George the whole time, so that she could monitor what was being said. She didn't want him to reveal too much at that point that could go out and spoil things. So she was always kind of the final say so of what I could actually print from the interviews. But most everything was fine. And that was the very first time I met George. And I'm not gonna lie, I had my heart in my throat. It was a nerve-wracking moment, because here was the first time I was getting the opportunity to meet what is essentially an icon, a legend of our time. And think of how the world might have changed to be different if George hadn't lived. I mean, all the relationships and things that George has done, jobs, and people are alive today because their parents met through Star Wars. And I just can't imagine, how much different things might have been had George Lucas not been born. And I kind of look at it in the same vein as Walt Disney. It's which kind of, to me, is why Disney buying Lucasfilm was the only most logical choice that could happen. So it was it was wonderful too, because George in his office, and it was the first time I got to see his office, which is beautiful. It's all kind of a Victorian decor, mahogany walls all around. And he had, original Maxfield Parrish paintings on the wall, and Norman Rockwell paintings. And as you walked up steps to go upstairs into his office, there was a glass display case there, and they had in there all kinds of little animation props from ILM of, speeder bikes. And I remember seeing Indy's dad's Grail Bible in there, sitting in the glass case. And so it was I kind of had to pinch myself that day.
That is absolutely amazing. And, I think we do talk a lot about how, you really can't replicate those times. But there's really something to that whole sort of build up and during the prequel era that is, I think is in the long term going to be looked back on as completely unique in sort of cinematic history, just in the sense of the amount of money and being spent on those three films, and the fact that at the end of the day, his opinion was the only opinion that mattered.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything that quite replicates that, especially these days. And sort of, there's just like, obviously you won't ever get that with Star Wars again, and people currently involved will tell you as much, just because there's more cooks in the kitchen. There's more people who have to make sure that certain bases are covered, right? So did you ever get a sense like during that period, like were people involved aware that this was like a particularly unique time during these productions, in terms of like that angle on it, in terms of the scope of them, and the fact that it was really just a wild artist like doing whatever he felt like? And there's lots of reports that people said maybe you shouldn't do this or that, or have a little boy as the lead character, things like that. Like, was this discussions you were hearing at the time?
Absolutely. It was a wild time. And I remember when I went out to the ranch one time and I met Rick McCallum, and he was going to take me up to the room where all of the artists were working. And it's kind of almost an attic room in the main house. And I remember walking up there, and we had to give a special knock to get in the door. And we went in the door, and there it was almost like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I walk in there, and there's busts and maquettes of all the different characters they were developing and designing. There was it's the first time I got to meet Doug Chang. He was over in this area doing illustration. As well as all the other artists that had been working for Star Wars Episode 1. So it was like literally like walking into Willy Wonka's magic world up there, because there was all these things that I could look at and see, and I could talk to Doug and say, well, what are you drawing here? What are you illustrating, I remember seeing a big maquette of Jar Jar Binks' head. And that was the first time I'd ever seen Jar Jar. Nobody had ever seen Jar Jar yet. So I remember thinking, wow, that's an unusual looking character. And then Rick sat down and we looked at the computer, and he gave me some early views of some of the early effect shots they were working on. And, before it was all over, Rick said, of course, now you can't say anything about this, nor can you print anything in the mail. I was like, I understand. He said, we just want you to have an idea of what's happening, what's going on. So it gives you a good feel of what's coming down the pike. And that was really great of them. And they obviously trusted me that I would not spill the beans, and I didn't. And, it was awfully hard to keep my enthusiasm down on that. But it was I don't know. And everybody knew it was special, what they were doing at that time. Everybody knew that it was, they were working on a very special project. Many of them had been Star Wars fans, and they all knew how many people were looking and waiting for this to happen. And they understood that what they were doing was not just another movie, but this was another moment in what could be, entertainment history. So I think they all were very aware that we need to do our best work, because this will be remembered down through history. This isn't just another movie that gets made, goes to video, and boom, it's done.
Well, there's not a lot of films that have other films made about people going to see that film,
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. So, and it's really just surreal to imagine you seeing those early design sketches and talking to Doug Chang and he explains some of what you're looking at there at the ranch. Doug Chang it's so great that the current Lucasfilm has him there as an integral part. I think he's VP and creative director right now, which is just wild to see, right? He really sort of filled that conceptual artist role that Ralph McQuarrie would have done on the original trilogy, and gave us those designs that you'll just never forget as long as you live, like the Naboo Starfighter. And I think he even had a hand in the lovely Razor Crest from The Mandalorian as well, which is just, it's just another one of those ships that you could just see the silhouette of it and right away what you're looking at.
That's right. And it's interesting. No, you said Naboo Starfighter. That's what he was sketching and illustrating when I went up into that Willy Wonka room to see the magic that was being done. That was what he had on his drawing board and was sketching it out and drawing.
It's hard to imagine that stuff. I mean, I remember as a consumer of the what was still Kenner at the time, the toys that were coming out, I got this preview Battle Droid Stap that, of course, none of us had any clue what it was, but it looked awesome, and we we enjoyed getting it. We had no clue what the battle droids were or anything like that, but I think that came out in '98 and without any context whatsoever. So
I know. I remember that, actually.
You had to be there. You had to be engaged in the content at the time. Unfortunately, as privileged as I was as a little kid, I did get a lot of this stuff. I was never actually a fan club member, but I do remember seeing that little badge on the figures and being sort of envious of what that content was. But I was lucky enough to get the odd issue of Insider and sort of catch up with what you guys were doing. And I feel like the media we got in between the films and sort of before episode 1 at that time, especially the Dark Horse comics, really solidified my engagement with the original trilogy and the Star Wars content in general, just because it was so that was the heavy metal era of Star Wars as far as I'm concerned. Like Dark Empire, and you would just get these and they were even doing kids books that were sort of like Goosebumps with Galaxy of Fear, and there was just a lot of just cool sort of edgy stuff at that time that I really fell in love with. And the Tops magazines, the Star Wars Galaxy and Star Wars, that stuff was great. Just seeing all that original art that original licensed art that was being cranked out, and of course that card set is just ridiculous art wise. If no one's ever looked at it, the Star Wars Galaxy cards are just, you really see when the Star Wars machine started getting cranked up again, and they put some money to some artists to just explore their imagination in that galaxy. We started to see some really crazy stuff, and it was an awesome time to be a fan.
And an artist too. I think, if my memory serves me, Shadows of the Empire Shizor, I think we got the exclusive first look at the artwork of what Shizor looked like. Again, we put it on the cover of one of the early issues of Star Wars Insider. And I think we got the first look at him so that fans could see this new character that was in the book.
The whole Shadows of the Empire thing was this crazy cross-media event that was that I mean, if you were there, you were there. If you played the game and were traumatized by how difficult it was to defeat IG-88, you had to be there, But it was one of those things where there was tie-in figures, the game, the novel, comics, and it really just, I feel like because there wasn't the expectation of a film, the narrative of those pieces just went off into a lot of wild and crazy directions that I hate to harp on the fact that it's not like the good old days, but I feel like there was sort of an edginess to that novel, especially, that is probably not something you'd see today. And I don't know if that was just because the writers were on a little bit of a longer leash with Lucas in charge than they are now. And I mean, I think that's
they were. That's an accurate statement.
Yeah, I feel like no one involved now would even argue otherwise, probably, just because there's just so many interests now, and everything is just sort of combed so finely to make sure that there's nothing sort of problematic per se. But were you really engaging in that media, or did you just because of your role, with the novels and comics, or because of your role where you just sort of, you were aware of the titles, but you just found yourself too busy to sort of stay involved in that level of the storytelling?
About that time is when the fan club started to explode, and we started getting an amazing number of new subscriptions and members. And the magazine that we were producing had become slick enough that we were able to put it on newsstands so that people could find it at a Barnes and Noble bookstore, or in the grocery store, or the comic book shops. And so, it started growing so fast at that point, and that I started having to hire people to help me do things. I could no longer run the business, handle all the merchandising, because we had a big deal was the Jawa Trader that was inserted in every issue of the Star Wars Insider. And we sold every single licensed product that Lucasfilm had for Star Wars. And then they gave us something very rare at that time, was the opportunity to do exclusive things, our own products that we wanted to do just for fan club members. And that was something that I remember we had to really fight for. And we did. We finally got it. And so I had a editor, John Snyder, came on board, who was the editor of the Star Wars Insider after me. And he would come to me and we'd sit down and talk about everything. And I did follow all of, obviously I followed everything that was going on, but I just didn't have the time to go in and read all the books and play the video games extensively. It wasn't as intimate with that at that point, because I had turned the editorship over to my editor, and I was more in the role of publisher, managing the business, deciding what was going to go in each issue, what products we were going to offer, what exclusive things we came up with, brainstorming sessions. We had actually do, Chris, and I don't know that I've ever said this before, but we had focus groups. We literally would look at who we had. We were based here where I am now in Denver, Colorado. Look at who we had that were members in the Lucasfilm Star Wars fan club here in the Denver metro area. And we'd pick out certain ones and we'd send them an invitation to come sit down for one evening in our big conference room here. And we'd provide dinner, and we would question them on what they liked, what they wanted to see as far as products go, what they wanted to see in the magazine, what they didn't like. And so it helped us keep a finger on the pulse of Star Wars fandom, because it really was helpful to see what they wanted and what they didn't want. And I think that did help us in a lot of ways. And they got to feel like they were involved in something really cool, and they got free dinner out of it at the same time. So that was a fun thing. I used to always love to sit in on those and hear them talking about, what hadn't been done. Nobody's done, this, or nobody's done something like this, or, and so, and then we'd make a whole list up of all the wish list of what these fans said they would love to see. And we would send that out to Lucasfilm, the licensing, and say, here's some ideas. What do you think? Can we do some of these? And so some of them, they gave us the ability to do exclusively, and others, they said, well, we got to protect that with Hasbro, because that's something more that they're going to want to do. So we can't let you guys do that. That's something that Hasbro is already talking about.
Just to jog people's memory, let's see, what are some of the most famous fan club exclusives? If I'm not mistaken, there's a Yoda lamp that's quite coveted.
Yep. Actually, the statue, the Yoda statue that was done by Lawrence Noble, that's out front of Lucasfilm right now. We had the very first version of that done by Lawrence. It was a small, I don't know, maybe 10-inch. It was the exact same sculpt of Yoda, just as he is in the statue in front of Lucasfilm now. And we created a limited edition number of those they were bronze on a wooden platform statues, signed and numbered by Lawrence Noble, I should say. And we created, I don't remember how many of those we did, but not many, because they were expensive. But today, in fact, I was just talking to someone about it. I mean, you'll find if you can even find one, which they're almost impossible to find, because collectors that do have them are not going to give them up. They go for anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000 now.
Yeah, which is precisely why I wasn't sure if it was a lamp or a statue, because it's virtually unattainable. And I just had a quick look if any are currently on eBay, and I'm seeing nothing. So
yeah, if it is, it would be rare, because there was so few of them made that the collectors who do have them, unless they've hit upon really hard times, I can't imagine them wanting to give up that piece.
Exactly.
Steve Sansweet has one in his museum.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Mr. Sansweet's got one of those, and intellectually, I sort of place you in that sort of pantheon of you really held the torch for the community alongside guys like Craig Miller
Oh
and
yeah.
Steve Sansweet, and you can listen to you guys talk for 10 minutes, and you know that you're getting just the authenticity is palpable, and this is something that the fans really value. And of course, I knew that before I tried to reach out to you to see if you'd chat today, and I knew it would be great, and has been so far. So give me your take on the sort of importance of having that sort of role of the sort of fan ambassador, and do you think it's something that's challenging for Lucasfilm to do in its current iteration? Is it why do you think we've lost that sort of tradition?
Yeah, well, it was important then because there wasn't the internet was not as widely available as it is today during my tenure, and it there was kind of I've heard fans describe it as the dark times because it was after Jedi and before the prequels,
Right?
and they called it the dark time, and so we were kind of one of the only sources that we were direct from Lucasfilm, and we would have updates with Rick McCallum on the prequels, and we'd show some of the early images, and we had new product that we would be coming out. So you didn't have to go to the store. Every issue you'd get the Jawa Trader, and you could see what new products were available at that point. You could order them directly from us. But it was a different time then. And I don't think today it would work as well because you have the internet now, and it's everything. The minute something's out, boom, it's crossed the whole world in seconds. Everybody's got it. Everybody's seen it. And there's just so much out there now. And it's funny because when we were doing the fan club, it was so few and far between that we'd get the movies that the appetite, the anticipation was just palpable. I mean, the fans were just rabid. They wanted something, and they'd eat it up in a heartbeat. And it's kind of funny because as much as I love the fact that there's so much Star Wars coming out now, especially on TV, on Disney Plus and such. But there's something lost a little bit in having that space of time to give people time to digest the last thing that came out and to be building that anticipation, building that excitement, because you don't get it all the time. So it's really, really special. But now, there's just, you can go over here and watch this, you go over here and watch this, go over here and watch this. This is coming out here. I suppose there are some people who would say, well, that's a great thing because we just got so much Star Wars now that, we're in love. And then I see their point. But I also say, I think that interim period between films was pretty important. And the anticipation and excitement was something that was kind of fun, and it's gone now.
Well, you're definitely right that there is, I feel like it's a more recent phenomenon. I remember like during the prequel era, there was, of course, the big divide between people who are saying that Lucas was messing the whole thing up and the original trilogy is where it's at. And now it's sort of a little different, especially on social media. I get the sense that there's basically two camps. Like generally it's the one, like you said, where, oh, it's so great that we're getting all the Star Wars content. Any Star Wars is better than no Star Wars. And then you have the side that's a little more critical of things from a narrative standpoint, let's say. Yeah. And I think the big part of that divide comes because if you're, say, a podcast that is very critical of of stuff that Disney is doing, you won't get interviews, you won't get this or that, you won't get early review copies of books, things like that. So if they're on some level, there are people, I feel like there's a community that's sort of encouraging people to just love everything. And yeah. I do worry that people, that sort of contributes to, and maybe you love the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it sort of contributes to this problem where it's just, you just get bombarded with content that's sort of good enough to maintain your attention for the time you're watching the movie, but the average Marvel Cinematic Universe film, for example, I could barely distinguish them in my mind retrospectively. You know what I mean? So I don't want Star Wars to become that, and I worry that when you sort of lose that core galactic importance of the narrative, when you have time for stuff like filler episodes where the Mandalorian gets trapped in a cave for half an hour, stuff like that. Stuff like, as entertaining as it is, it's sort of besides the point to the core narrative of the story, right? And I feel like, well, obviously when you have one movie every 3 years and then a gap for 10 or 15 years, you just don't have time for that kind of storytelling, right? So is there a way to sort of be a sort of positive force in the fan community while also sort of keeping in mind that these are films made by people and it's not the word of the creator anymore, per se?
Well, I think, first off, just to go back to what you were previously saying, it's almost like I compare it to having your favorite food. You love this, whatever the dish is, it's your favorite dish. But if you keep putting it in front of you constantly, it's going to start getting old. You're going to go, oh, I love it, but no more, not right now. I don't want another one right now. And that's the way it is with Star Wars, I think, and Marvel events especially, is that they just keep putting it in front of you, putting it in front of you, putting it in front of you, and it becomes less special, and you can only love it so much, for so long. On the other hand, what you were just asking me, my take on that is that you love, because I hear fans say this came out and oh my gosh, I hated it and it's ruined my whole love for Star Wars now. And I thought, what's wrong with you? You've loved Star Wars right up to this, and you didn't like this. But why does that make everything you loved in the past no longer special to you? You pick out what you like. And especially now, it's like, if you love this, if you love that, then rewatch that, watch that, be a fan of that. If you don't like these things, throw them out. Don't watch them. Pretend they didn't even exist, and just love what you love. And so I'm the one on that hand, I guess I have to say, you don't have to love everything that comes out. You can love what is special to you and ignore the other stuff. You don't have to have everything that's been ever made of Star Wars be special, and you have to love it. So I often have talked with people who say, oh, some have said the prequels ruined it for me. Others have said they hated the sequels, hated Han Solo being killed, on and on. And I've said, well, then just watch the original films where you had Han Solo, and you don't have to even remember that he was killed in The Force Awakens, So that's my attitude about it.
Yeah, I think in a perfect world where we're all sort of healthy about our intellectual discourse, we could talk about this stuff as if it is not, out of the Bible, and we can intellectualize it in a way where it's like you really have to just sort of look at it era by era, and you could sort of separate the original trilogy and the prequels if you want, or just sort of look at that as that's when Lucas, the madman, was in charge, and it was the way it was because that was the period you were in. And now it's a different animal, and that's you're not a bad fan if you intellectually draw that line that it changed here because it's an ownership thing and there are reasons why it's not exactly what it used to be. That doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means it's understandable why it's different now.
Yeah. And there are people out there that are purists that say, I only like the movies that George Lucas was specifically involved with, either as a producer or as the director. And they say everything else is not from the mind of the creator or something. But, in a sense it is in some way, because I don't know how much involvement he has in any story that comes out today. Do they run it by, do they send it over to George and say, hey, George, do you like this or not? Or, I have no idea. I don't think they do. There's too much for him now.
Bob Iger put out a book that pretty explicitly stated that they did not use Lucas's idea for episode 7. So I think that debate is sort of settled at this point. And, personally, could I imagine the amount of hubris required to tell Lucas we're not going with your idea for episode 7? It's beyond my comprehension. But What that meeting must have been like, I can't
I
imagine.
know.
But
I know.
so I want to be respectful of your time here, and I just want to touch on a few other things real quick. So
Sure.
you mentioned that you're in Denver. What a lot of listeners might not know is that Dan's actually sort of responsible for the very first Star Wars celebration, which I'm sure it's no coincidence took place in Denver, Colorado. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
That was an amazing undertaking, and it has a lot of memories, a lot of good things. Many of the things that the celebrations now do were we started there and built the foundation for in Denver back in 1999, and and that was, I'd also say too, that goes in with this whole excitement, anticipation, anxiousness for the movies, because that happened 2 weeks, I think it was, prior to episode 1 opening. So some of the very first footage that anybody ever saw on the big screen was at Celebration 1, where we had a big moment with Maul and Qui-Gon and Kenobi all doing their lightsaber battle, and which I still think is one of the most amazing lightsaber battles in any of the Star Wars films, TV series, you name it. But they got to see that. We brought many of the prequel actors out, so they got to meet them for the first time, hear what their characters were like. And we had one of the very first opportunities to buy a lot of the different episode 1 action figures. We literally had the Hasbro store, and we had the first Star Wars action figures from the prequels you could buy there. And the night that we closed Celebration 1 was that night they were having the big Toys R Us sales where people could come in. It was like at midnight, I think it was, and you could come and get in and get all the Star Wars episode 1 stuff. And I can remember very, very vividly after Celebration 1, we had closed it all up and we were going to get dinner, and we had to drive past Toys R Us. And I mean, the line from the front door was going all the way out, packed the store, all the way out into the parking lot. And I thought, wow, how amazing is that these people are. And it was, like 10 o'clock at night. They still have to wait 2 more hours before they could get in and get all those figures. But it was a labor of love for me and my crew, because we felt that it was a convention for fans, made by fans. Unfortunately, Mother Nature didn't cooperate with us. We had a deluge of rain through a couple of days, and we couldn't get into the massive convention center here. It was booked already. So we had to put it into what was essentially an Air Force hangar, to have all of the dealers area where everybody could come inside there. And then we had to build these 2 huge, what I'd call circus tents for the stages. And those stages would leak occasionally because, we had it literally was the worst rain we'd had in 100 years. And it happened on the weekend that Celebration 1 happened. So many people have bittersweet memories of that convention. There was a lot of rain, a lot of mud, a lot of water. But a lot of them have looked at it as, all the fans got together and still, trudged through it and loved it. And it's kind of the Star Wars Woodstock now. In fact, Rick McCallum told me that. I remember coming back into his trailer prior to him coming on stage. And I remember just looking at him and saying, I cannot believe this rain. It's just like it's the most rain we've ever had. He looked at me and he said, Dan, don't worry about it. He said, this is going to be the Star Wars Woodstock. He said, people will look back on this years from now and realize that they hung in there and they got through the whole first celebration through this rain and mud and everything. I said, I hope so. I hope that's what they think. But yeah, it was an amazing thing to put together. And the fact that it actually happened, Chris, 2 weeks prior to Celebration, we had the Columbine high school shootings here in Denver. And as a result of that, Lucasfilm called me and said they thought we should cancel the event. And I don't know how much you want me to go into that. I've told this story on other places, but we had Anthony Daniels had come out, and he stayed with me for 2 weeks, and we would meet in my office, and he and I helped try to design everything on how we're going to do this, how we're going to do that. And we got the word one day that Lucasfilm felt we should cancel it. And this was 2 weeks before the event. And I said, my God, people have planned their whole vacations around this. They've already bought their tickets. On the amount of work we've put into this, all the licensees that have got all of their stuff coming for it. I said, and the fact I said this city needs something good, something to help build it up, because people were just devastated by this thing. And so they said, okay, well, Anthony and I talked to him, and we hoped we had convinced them. They said, let us talk with George. We'll get back to you tomorrow. And lo and behold, they came back to us and said, okay. We talked to George, and he said, all right, based on what you've told us. I also, in the meantime, got the mayor of Denver to fax them a letter saying, please don't cancel it. Please make this happen. Denver needs this shot in the arm right now. And so between all of that, they agreed to go ahead and let us do it. And we raised about $30,000 for the victims of the Columbine shootings. And it happened. And then we had the rain on top of that. So the fact it even came about is a little bit of a miracle story.
That's beautiful that you raised that money, and of course I know this story, and we're here for every one of the listeners who hasn't had the luxury of hearing you tell this before, and that was great. Rick McCallum, when he told you that, was absolutely right, because I didn't have the luxury of being there. I was like 8 or 9 years old in Canada, and there was just no chance my parents were going to play that game. But you know what? I was aware of it, and later on I heard about the rain and that it was this crazy thing. But a lot of firsts happened there. Of course, yeah. Before that you have the 10th anniversary proto celebration, but that's too much of a deep dive, I think. But it's just it is remembered as that sort of Woodstock, as somebody who couldn't have even been there. And from my perspective, as the listeners probably know, I'm pretty deep into the vintage Star Wars collecting side of thing with the early Kenner stuff, and that sort of sub community. The first two celebrations especially are regarded as just this crazy time for, like, some of the stuff that showed up for sale at those shows, just like in terms of like internal prototypes and stuff that who knows all the various ways that got out of Kenner at the time, but there was just crazy prototypes for sale for like shockingly low prices, and it's just the stuff of legend these days that people just look back on like they can't even believe what happened. Personally, I only got to go to a Star Wars celebration for the first time in Chicago, and it was a fabulous experience, and I was really sort of keyed into that sort of vintage collecting community side of things, and something that's really great that tradition celebration has been able to maintain, in no small part thanks to guys like Gus Lopez who run it. But there's a panel stage they have called the Collecting Track, where they do all these niche panels that are sort of focused on various aspects of collecting. And in Chicago, they actually had the first ever panel at Celebration that was actually about the Star Wars Holiday Special, which is just wild. And I came to realize at some point that this was the only stage at Celebration that didn't have official camera crew at it. So I actually filmed the whole Collecting Track in Chicago, all 20 panels, and that's up on YouTube on Collecting Track awesome. On YouTube.
That's great.
That's fantastic. So that's all available. You could check out this crazy holiday special panel that happened, which was a lot about the props and costumes that have surfaced over the years. And it's just the fact that they still have that stage after it's sort of handed off to Disney, and it's still run by the passionate community member collectors who are doing it on a volunteer basis. It's really great that they're sort of able to maintain that sort of tradition, and I hope that continues.
Oh, me too. I think that's some of the most fun moments you can have at a celebration, in my opinion, because so many people are collectors that are there. Very few of them are there and they don't want to buy anything. They don't want to collect anything. They're just there because they love Star Wars. Most everybody is a collector in some way. shape, or form. You know.
Absolutely. And, you guys with the fan club obviously put out a bunch of exclusive figures that are starting to become a little more popular these days. The Cantina band members and the Bomar Monk is a couple of them.
Yeah.
Which,
and we also did Ula and Salacious Crumb was a fan club exclusive at 1 year too.
Yeah, that's something that's actually come up very recently. I don't know how much you sort of stay aware of the current Hasbro stuff, but they've been doing this HasLab thing where they have this Black Series gigantic Rancor they're trying to crowdfund, and it's actually, the campaign's ending within a day or two of us recording this. And the interesting thing about it is the former Hasbro Star Wars design director made a comment on Instagram. He's like, if you guys are holding out for them to add a Ula figure to the package, that's not doable anymore in today's day and age. So don't hold your breath for that sort of thing. So basically, you can't make an Ula figure anymore, is what we've learned recently. But once again, the period that the fan club was active was a very interesting time and place where a lot of stuff happened that you won't see again.
I'm glad we got to run. I really am glad I got to run the fan club at that time, because to me it was a very special time to be a Star Wars fan. We had all of the old films, all the original films that people loved and what made them a Star Wars fan. And then we had the excitement of coming into the new era of Star Wars films. It was the start of all of that. And Episode 1, even though it had its critics and, people hated Jar Jar at the moment and such, I do think that it's, as time goes by, it's looked upon with less hate. And starting to realize there were some amazing things that were in that. And the Duel of the Fates, John Williams' theme as they're fighting the lightsaber, it's like, it gives me goosebumps when I still watch that.
But thanks for bringing that up, because I love to point out the fact all the time that how interesting is John Williams? Like, musically, like, I'm not qualified to make this statement, but I'm going to make it anyways. But like, how interesting is it that a musician or a composer peaks creatively at like their mid 60s, you know what I mean? like it's usually 27, right? But if you look at the prequel music, and then he did the first Harry Potter around the same time, like that was when he was just firing on all cylinders. And obviously Episode 1 is some of the best John Williams you'll ever hear.
Well, and I think he's coming back for Indiana Jones 5 as well. So I think he's going to score that. So that might be his last. I don't know, because he's getting up there now. I don't know.
And to be fair, that's some of my favorite stuff from the sequel trilogy as well. Like, Rey's theme is a fantastic piece.
Rey's theme is beautiful. That's probably one of my favorite pieces of music from the sequels is Rey's theme.
Yeah, there's a lot of standout stuff from that first film, especially. So I know a little bit that you're you're a pretty big fan of the Mandalorian stuff. What's sort of exciting you lately in terms of upcoming Star Wars projects? A lot has been announced. Some of it's been canceled shortly after being announced, but a lot of it's still going ahead. So what are you really looking forward to these days?
I've fallen in love with the Mandalorian. I think it's the best thing they're doing now for Star Wars. It is so well done. The characters are so good. The acting is great. The design for the characters and the ships. I'm a huge fan of The Mandalorian. I can't wait for the new season when that happens. As far as shows that I'm really excited about, the Kenobi series has got me extremely excited. And the whole announcement that Hayden Christensen is coming back as Anakin, and the idea of seeing a Vader Obi-Wan duel, lightsaber duel, is really very, very cool. So that one has got me. I'm as pumped for that as I am for anything in the Star Wars universe right now. So that's coming. I'm also really intrigued to see what they do with the Ahsoka series, and I hope that is done well, because Ahsoka's an amazing character, and I would hate to see anything happen that would ruin that character for anybody. So those are the ones that I'm most excited about, to be honest. I'm more of a live action fan than an animation fan. So I love the Clone Wars series. I still think that's the best of any animation they've done. And of course, I worked for a long time, for 11 years. I worked directly with Ashley Eckstein, doing PR and marketing for her universe, a line of clothing. And so I got to know Ashley very, very well. And it was amazing to see how the character of Ahsoka took off with Ashley promoting it and being involved with it and such. So that was wonderful. But yeah, I would have to say the Kenobi series and the Mandalorian new season and the Ahsoka series. Those are all the ones that I'm most anticipating.
Well, it's great to hear that you're still getting excited about the same stuff that most of us are, and we're rounding up on an hour here. There's just there's just one other thing I wanted to bring up just before we let you go. That just because none of the other hosts could make it because we were recording a little earlier, and because of that I can derail the conversation in any direction I'd like. So you were also you might say responsible for an early incarnation of the Star Trek fan club as well. Much like you, I'm a why not both kind of guy, and they're completely different fandoms, and I really I appreciate both of them in their own right. But so like, what is like when you're starting the Star Trek fan club, are you really responsible for this sort of archetype of the science fiction collecting convention going stereotype that we all understand these days? Like, are you really the core of that idea where the standard convention attending nerd that most of us identify as? Is this where this really came from?
I think there's some truth to that. I don't know that I'm solely responsible for that, but yeah, definitely. I started the Star Trek club when I was a teenager, my senior year in high school, after the motion picture came out, and fell in love with that. And I'd always loved Star Trek prior to that, the original series. And so launched that. And it wasn't until about 2 years after I launched it that Paramount Studios saw what I was doing and made me realize I wasn't doing it with a license. So they flew me out to Paramount and had meetings, and I'd already become good friends with Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, at that point. So he put a good word in for me and said, this is the guy we want to have do this. So they said, okay, well, we'll give you a license. You're the first one to ever get a license, because there had been other Star Trek fan clubs. Obviously, Trekkies, the whole idea of them meeting in their clubs and stuff and such, but then there'd never been an official one. And so I got to do the first official. And to be honest, Chris, it was because of the work I had done with Star Trek that George and the others in licensing at Lucasfilm decided to maybe give me the opportunity to do the Star Wars fan club, because up to the point when I had it, it had all been done in-house. And they had finally closed it down after Jedi came out, because nobody felt like there's going to ever be any new Star Wars. So there's like a year cancellation where there was nothing. And then they saw what I was doing with Star Trek, and I responded positively back to them, and got Star Wars. So Star Trek had a lot to do with that, with me doing the Star Wars fan club. It was built on what I had done with Star Trek that I was able to do that. So yeah, it's and so it was one of the few times, I think, where these two worlds came together, because our offices were Star Wars Central and Star Trek Central. And if you're a fan of either one, you'd come to our offices. We had a store, and you could find Star Trek on one side and Star Wars on the other. And you'd go into our warehouse that looked like something from Indiana Jones, the final scene. It was just rows and rows of going down through our warehouse. And on each shelf was, Star Wars bathrobes and Star Wars masks and Hasbro action figures. And then over here were Star Trek mugs and Star Trek model kits. And yeah, it was kind of an amazing, time. I love Star Trek and I love Star Wars equally. My favorites are, though, the originals of both. Because I grew up with them, they influenced me. The original Star Trek series and the original Star Wars films, for me, hold a special place.
Absolutely. And, it's just, I don't think anything can sort of impress upon our listeners how different and smaller of a world it was. You started making a Star Trek fanzine and you got a call from Paramount, basically, and you're talking to Gene Roddenberry, and not long after that. You just can't write this stuff? This is just wild, you know?
I don't know that I could have done it today in the world we live in today. It was a time and place that's gone, you know. It came and it was there and then it was gone.
Well, you were definitely the right guy at the right time, and and I encourage everybody. This is how you know that Dan was a real special force to both of these fan communities. If you Google Dan, the first two results are his page on Memory Alpha, which is the Star Trek wiki, and right under that is his page on Wikipedia. Though that's as much street cred as you could possibly ever have. That's the first two results for him, is the wikis for Star Trek and Star Wars. So you know, I want to be respectful of your time here. We'll let you go. But this has been great. I really appreciate all the time you've given me, and there's some fantastic stories there. Is there anything you wanna plug before you go? I know I caught up with you on Instagram and I was like, is this actually Dan Madsen? He's posting stuff and he's engaging with people. I need to see if you'll be interested in doing an interview. So where can people find you?
Well, they can find me on Facebook. I'm there. I'm on Twitter as the Dan Madsen. I'm on Instagram as Madsen8973. And I'm always posting interesting stuff from Star Wars and Star Trek in the past, things from the past. So that's where they can find me. And I'm basically today, I'm doing a lot of PR and marketing work for a variety of different companies. And so it's, I'm happy and doing well. And I still am involved to have my finger in the Star Wars and Star Trek world. That's
great. I encourage everybody to go follow Dan on those platforms. There's always something interesting going on those feeds. So please do check them out. And once again, thank you so much for your time, Dan. This was wonderful.
Chris, thank you. I really enjoyed it.